As we all know, there's lots of different conditions that affect carp fishing and how the carp behave. Weather conditions are paramount, but also moon conditions can affect it. And during this piece, I'm going to try and go through a little bit to do with winds and air pressures and how they affected at different times of years on different lakes, and then touch on a bit on moon phases and how to potentially target certain specific carp inside your pit. The main talked about weather condition in carp fishing is winds, and rightly so, they have a huge effect. I touched upon winds in my last piece on winter fishing and how it affects them in winter, and I'll briefly go through that again regarding in winter I'll look for the air temperature to be higher than what the water temperature is. If that is the case, then I'll look to get onto wind, not necessarily do so, but I'll look at looking in those areas a lot more for fish activity. The same as if the sun is out and we've got a wind which doubles the surface area of the water when you get a wind, because you get that effect. If you've got direct sunlight, this will warm the water a lot quicker, so fish are more inclined to get onto the wind. In spring, I find the winds to be of the most paramount. Quite often on most lakes, it's before the weed has got a chance to get right up, and it makes the carp really, really flighty. Especially as the weather is generally warming up in spring. So generally speaking, the temperature of the air temperature is usually warmer than what the water temperature is. So therefore, a lot of the time the carp are following it, and they can be so flighty up and down on, you know, if you've got a lake like Dinton White Swan where I've been fishing, where it either blows north or south, as soon as it changes, they're one way to the other, and they're quite predictable at times. Whereas, you know, other lakes, they may not be quite so predictable. Yeah, every lake is a little bit different. In the summertime, in the winds don't have as much effect, I don't think, especially with a lot of lakes getting the weed up. They're generally where the weed is will hold the carp, because the water temperature's got up as high as it's going to get up. The wind isn't having so much of an effect with where the warm water is going, or even the cold water. Sometimes they'll get on the cold winds just because they want to be down there because of the weed condition, not necessarily because of the wind. Another thing that has a huge effect on carp fishing is air pressures. Generally speaking, low air pressure is generally winds and rain, high winds, high rain, overcast conditions, whereas high air pressure is more sun, blue skies. Obviously in the summer that makes this warm, and in the winter that means we've got the cold, frosty nights. My own views on air pressures are very much lake dependent. Each lake I've fished has been different, and you can only work that out by fishing. Obviously you can talk and you can look at other catchers and when they're coming out, and look at, you know, times when lots of fish are coming out compared to others, and pick up a relatively good idea of what's going on quite quickly. But there's nothing better than being there yourself. Generally speaking, in autumns I've found that I do a lot better on lower air pressures in deeper waters, and likewise in spring I'll do a lot better in shallow water in high air pressure conditions. But this isn't that they're the rules that everyone goes with, but a lot of time I found it where it can be totally different to the rules, where, like I said, I briefly spoke on it earlier with bundies at 55 foot deep, that 1030 air pressures or above was the best air pressures to fish for them, and that was in December time. And that, I'm told, although I haven't fished that lake in the rest of the year, is the same for the summer. On the water that I'm on this year, Dinton White Swan, I've found the air pressures to be hugely important as to where the fish will end up. More so with the winds. I found, like, with a southerly wind, if it was a high air pressure, they'd get right on the end of it. But if it was a low air pressure, they tend to drop back. And it was this piece of information, along with the wind, like I said, I've just gone into the wind and the moon phases that actually helped me catch the southern triple row. And if it wasn't for keeping an eye on such things like that, I would not have caught it. I use an app called XE Weather to check on my air pressures, but there's many apps out there, and you can even get apps that will actually tell you your air pressure live wherever you are as well. A very controversial subject in carp fishing in moon phases. A lot of people are straight away rubbish them, and I'm totally the opposite, to be honest. I think a lot of people know that I look into my moon phases a lot, and I think it's caught me loads of carp I wouldn't have caught if I didn't understand why and then go into it in such detail. And I'm going to, over the next sort of couple of minutes, I'm going to go through bits and bobs into how I get my pieces of information, how I go about looking for information, how it has an effect on the carp. The average span of a moon cycle is 29.5 days and is made up of 4 phases. The first phase is the new moon, which then goes into the first quarter as a second phase. The third phase is then the full moon, and the last phase is then the third quarter of the moon. Generally speaking, there are about 7 days in between, but there can be as much as about 8 or 9. These phases are what will affect lots of different things, like the natural growth. The phases will actually bring in weather conditions at times of year. Quite often you'll find in spring and autumn that your low pressure fronts and your big winds are brought in via your moon phases. This is just something you can keep an eye on, and something I've noticed over the years. The way that I've used moon phases to my benefit hugely is by going through capture dates of target fish. Now, for instance, one of my target fish that I caught this year, the southern triple row, I've gone through over 10 years worth of every capture date going, and I will find out what moon phase each capture date is on. If I can, I'll try and go through and find out what air pressure it was on that day, what wind direction it was, what swim it came from. And generally, by doing all this research, which can take several hours, you can usually find a pattern with each fish that you're searching out. Not all the time, but usually most carp will have some kind of pattern. Now, I'm not going to go through exact carp and exact fish, but certain fish are literally, you can give them maybe 20 dates in an entire year that fish will come out, and it will not come out on any other date than those 20 days. Some fish are that regimented, other fish not quite so much so, but by doing this information, if your carp that you're after in your lake is that regimented, you've only got to be there on them 20 days and you will have a very good chance of catching that fish. Now, we all work, I work myself, and what I do is book my holidays around these days in order to get in the area. Sometimes if it's a popular area, you've got to get in there a day or two early so that you're beating other people to it as well. As we know, carp fishing isn't just to get about the carp, it's about the anglers as well, and staying one step ahead. And moon phases for me has been hugely advantageous to be able to look into this detail. Out of respect for the guys that fish the waters I'm on, I've got friends that are still chasing fish like southern triple row. I'm not just going to give the game away and tell everybody it's moon phase, but the information's out there for everybody to find out. If you're willing enough to go through every capture date, to go through people's social media, to friend request people, to ask friends of friends for information and bits and bobs, this is what you've got to do to find out this information. If you're willing to do that, the information's there, and it's out there for many carp. It's all up to how much effort you're willing to put in. When it comes to moon phases, a lot of people think of full moons, new moons. They think of full moons, big commons. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a few big commons that I can say I'll fish for that do like a full moon. But I know equally a few linears that like a full moon as well. Or I know certain fish that like 2 days after a full moon. It doesn't just have to be on the full moon. You get declines of the moons, which last probably 36 hours, and probably inclines out of 36 hours. So when you talk about a moon phase, you're probably talking about a 3-day period generally, and that's the period of the entire phase. Now certain fish can be that regimented that it's a certain day of the phase, you know, either right on it, on the incline or on the decline. But that's all information that's out there that you can work out, and by doing so you can put a lot of extra carp on the bank. The question a lot of people ask is, why do the moon phases have an effect on the carp? And that is widely up for debate still. There's lots of different reasons, such as, you know, the moon is a satellite, it has a gravitational effect on us, and it controls our tides. It also has an effect on your hatch rates of different naturals and different things. So all of these have a reason. I don't think there's one specific reason why the moon works, but when it comes to target fish fishing, I think certain fish, as they're all individuals, just like us humans, just feed that little bit harder on a certain moon. They're just a bit more susceptible to slipping up to a catcher. I don't think it's that, oh, it's a full moon, oh, where's a hook, I'll go and get myself caught today. Of course it's not like that. It's just they feed a bit harder, they throw caution to the wind a little bit more on them dates. Every single lake's different and they'll all fish slightly different, but by using some of the pieces I've just mentioned and by going through capture dates, if you're after a certain fish in a lake, you go through capture dates and areas of the lake where it gets caught times a year, I'm sure you'll find some form of pattern that will help you catch that fish. I'm continuing my winter campaign over on Tyreham Hall, and if you want to see how I'm getting along, then subscribe to the Prologic YouTube channel, or check them out on Facebook or Instagram, or check myself out, Marcus Clark, on Facebook and Instagram. And hopefully the next time you see me, we'll be cradling baby bass.